We are back, we are live. It's the return of the Carrot Poker podcast with your host, Pete, the Carrot Man Clark. And on the other end of the line today, we have PLO specialist, Run It One coach, and the guy that I first saw on the commentary for the Galfond challenge. We have Andreas Froehli on the line today. How's it going, Andreas?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I am doing well, and I know I messed up your last name. I did my best, but, you know, Scottish accents trying to pronounce German names. What can I do?
Yeah, I think it was pretty good. I mean, it's not that easy to pronounce these German names.
Give me a 6 out of 10. I'll take a 6. Happy with that.
Yeah.
So, the first time, I know that you make videos on Run It Once. I've seen some of your content sort of helping people transition from No Limit over to PLO. I know that you play PLO as your main grind and that you're a professional poker player. But first off, I'd like to talk about how I first heard of you. And that was actually when I was watching Galfond Challenge, probably back at the start of lockdown, I would imagine, was when this was. And it was his first match against Veni Vidi when Phil's like downswinging horribly and the commentary team's just there trying to be like, yeah, come on, Phil, let's go. And I remember you being on a few of those shows. So how did you find doing the commentary for that? And what did you think about that first crazy match with the swings and everything with Phil and Veni Vidi?
My first things first, the commenting on the challenge was a huge challenge for me. Of course, both Veni Vidi and Phil, with their high-level play, I could only comment on some of the things that I've seen in like a heads-up PLO solver or in Visions. Sorry about that.
All good.
Some tractors going by. So yeah, I could only comment on what I've seen in the solver, and then what was really interesting during the games when I saw them play, I thought about, okay, well, why are they doing certain plays, and try to just tell the audience what my thoughts were. And sure, I was ahead of like the average player was watching, but there were also some really good PLO players in the chat at times, of course, because they were studying like what Phil was doing, because they would be playing them maybe later in a challenge or then on Poker Stars in between, and they wanted to know how Phil Galfond's heads-up game progressed. And also Veni Vidi was obviously still playing on Poker Stars quite a bit, and then afterwards again. So they had an interest in the game, and they were obviously also watching the challenge a little bit. So I knew there was like a good mix in the audience. And the challenge was also to basically make it appealing the commentary appealing to different kinds of people watching. And I thought, the mainstream audience is just going to try to understand what's going on, and I try to call as much of the action, and with Stapes, for example, being the main commentator, even him doing the funny stuff, I would just do the commentary and the strategy, take a different role, and hopefully that team would make a good product in the end for the people watching.
I thought it worked really well, actually. Stapes is like your classic household name. He's kind of like the game show presenter of the 90s, but like the poker version in 2020, right? He's just like everywhere. And his voice is almost just like, he's almost like the Jesse May of like the modern day. Jesse May was this guy like way back in the day I used to listen to on like Channel 4 late night poker, and he'd be like, he had no idea what the game was about, and he would just say absurd things and they were hilarious. And then the poker guy would come in with the summaries, and I think Stapes is a bit more advanced than that, but he's very much there to sort of provide that soothing, entertaining tone, and I thought that your analysis over it worked pretty well. What did you think about sort of Phil's play, Veni Vidi's play, like in that first match? Were you able to gauge like at all? I know they're really high level guys, but were you able to get a feel for like maybe who had an edge at that time, or what kind of exploits one was making against the other?
Well, there were just certain pre-flop plays that were really easy to spot, and some adjustments that both of these players made. For example, especially Phil, he was at first playing every hand, like literally, and there were just some hands where he ended up running into bluff catchers fairly often on the river, with hands like I think Queen 7 Deuce Deuce Rainbow or something like that, just because he was playing every hand and then running into spots. And then eventually, I think when he did play a bit tighter, that worked out well for him. But yeah, I mean, you can't really say how much of the million or 900k downswing was variance and how much was not having played as much in the previous years. It's very hard to tell, but yeah, I could just see those adjustments pre-flop, and then also some of the different sizings that were used on the flop. The check raise sizing by Phil was a bit smaller, but there were just some small things that I could tell that they were trying to do different, but I had no idea like what their range construction was, because obviously we didn't see many showdowns.
Sure.
And those are necessary to see, okay, well, how are they trying to balance things? And what was particularly interesting to me for the PLO match is how they played the river notes when the flop and the turn went check. How, for example, Vinny Vidi found check raises on the river with nut flushes with a pretty decent frequency. Maybe he also ran well in that spot particularly, but all of the times you think, well, if you have the nut flush, how do you still have it not having bet the flop on the turn, right? You would almost think that maybe he has the blocker this time again.
Yeah.
But no, whether it was a 3-bet pot and the flop and the turn went check, which is a lot more rare than in a single raise pot. In a single raise pot, that happens a lot more often, especially in heads up PLO. Then I was really surprised how, all these notes were kind of, well prepared. Of course, far from perfect, but I mean, it's just like, it just showed how tough it is to do that, especially if you try it yourself. It's like, well, that's actually what I'm not doing. You realize that really quickly watching those two players.
And working with a trainer will teach you that as well, right? Because you'll get into the node and you'll be like, oh, well, clear value bet with a nut flush in the river. You'll press bet on a trainer like, I don't know, Lucid or Simple or whatever you train with. And this works in Hold'em, and it'll say check 80% of the time. And you'll be like, what's going on here? And you'll have to sort of investigate it. And this is something I'm always saying to students. If you're out of position, the EV difference between bet and check when you hold a value hand may not be anything at all. It may be very, very slight. And that's because when you're out of position, there are more streets left in the hand or more semi-streets left in the hand than when you're in position. And this nut flush thing is really cool, because when your opponent doesn't bluff, right, he checks back flop, he checks back turn, what does he have less of? Well, he has less, if he's going to double delay his bluff, he doesn't actually have the club, he doesn't have the flush blocker that often. So when you've got two of the suit, you're really unblocking this double delayed bluffing range really well, right? He's going to have more hearts, spades, and diamonds in his range. So this is something I've been teaching people a lot recently. Think about when you're out of position, even if you have a hand that could value bet, that could easily go for this bet, have a think about whether the blockers of the hand might make it more suitable to check raise instead of just out and out bet. And obviously guys like Venny are going to be in the lab, doing that a lot. Do you think, Andreas, that Phil was trying too hard to become the GTO robot at first? Did he just run better, or do you think he was playing a lot better when he sort of, in his own words, reverted back to old Phil and his old comfortable habits? And we shall let Andreas answer that in just 1 second. First off, the range collection over at carrotcorner.com is growing. We now have 3 products on offer, maybe more by the time you watch this. We have the 50 to 100 NL 6 max cash ranges, basic and complete. This complete one contains all kinds of cool ranges like squeezing, how to play as a cold caller against squeeze, how to cold 4-bet properly, all sorts of stuff. And we've now got our heads up ranges on offer, where we'll be looking at all kinds of different opening sizes, 2BB, 2.5BB, 3BB, and how to construct full 3-bet and 4-bet game plans against all of them. If you are lacking a pre-flop, solid GTO fundamental approach, this is where you can get them for cheap, carrotcorner.com. And now it's back to the pause.
Well, that was what he was saying in some of the interviews that he gave during and after the challenge, that he basically needed to trust how he approached the game before the solvers were out. And I think that he was at least trying to bluff catch, for example. Like what he would also do is like block bet the river with a higher frequency than I think was optimal, because he decreased that play later in the challenge, and he would still defend versus Veni-Vidi's raises quite a bit. And for the first month or so, Veni-Vidi had it like 80-90% of the time. And then later on, when he would defend versus those river raises, Vini would have plus more often, probably just the free,
variance.
Whether he was running variance, and then all of a sudden he started winning a lot back in these spots. Whereas at the beginning, he just thought, why his bluff catching didn't work, and a lot of it probably just comes down to variance, and there's not that much more to it. These heads-up matches can get fairly crazy with variance.
And we have the lesser variance version right now with Polk and Negreanu. Just before we move on and talk a bit more about you and your career, what do you think about that match? Have you been following it, and do you have any strong opinions on? Obviously, right now I think Daniel's down a fair bit, just under $1 million, something like that. They're breaking at the moment. Is this normal? Is Daniel running particularly bad? Is he tilting? Is he playing worse? Do you have any thoughts on what's going on there?
I think I have observed the challenge quite a bit, and I think we can pretty much listen to what Doug Polk is saying in the interviews and his estimates. I don't think he's like the kind of guy who just tries not to fairly estimate what's going on. I mean, he said it himself. He probably would be ahead 300k instead of 800k that he ran really hot, and that's probably what his true EV was roughly. It could be obviously quite a bit different than that. It doesn't mean that he's right, but I trust his judgment there, just from having so much experience playing back in 2012 to 2013, 14, some of the best in the world, and seeing how those matches could go one way or the other in terms of 25k hand sample size.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting, though, from a sort of mental game standpoint, when they resume, just whether Daniel is able to hold it together. There were already some cracks appearing there, which is normal. I mean, you're an underdog. You're getting smashed way worse than even your expectation would be. You're probably losing more than some weaker fish would lose on average as well. So you're clearly running bad. But for how long can Daniel even hold it together, knowing that it was such an uphill battle anyway? And now it's even more so that he's been on the wrong end of variance. This is going to be psychologically very tough. And what are the chances of Daniel actually resuming to play the second half of the challenge? He's been saying he will. I mean, we had this conversation about Phil as well. Will he come back against Veni? Will he, won't he? And that comeback goes down in the history books. Is it possible for D-Negs to come back into this match and, surmount a Galfond-esque revival?
I personally don't think that he can come back in the challenge with anything more than like 2-3%, but then that's roughly the number that Phil had, or maybe Phil had like 5-6% or something like that. Yeah, I think that Dana's chances are lower than Phil's by maybe it's actually very close. I probably think that he's still going to play the second half anyway. If he's not like down more than 1.5 by the 12k hand mark, I think he's just going to play the second half. He cannot really go and quit it at 16k hands. So at 12k hands, he's probably not going to be down so much that he's going to fully quit. So he's going to play the second half, I think, almost every time. Yeah.
When you watched the Galfond challenge, so back to PLO for a second, as that's your main game, when you were watching that and seeing these swings, were you sort of familiar with that already from your PLO background? Do you play a lot of heads up in your own grind?
No, I don't play a lot of heads up. I actually specifically for the challenge commentary looked into some heads up situations, at least on the flop, and then a little bit on turn and river. But I'm not familiar with like how much bigger variances in heads up and what to expect within like a session of 800 hands. But of course, variance is also quite large in 6 max.
Sure. Yeah. I think standard deviation wise it leaps up quite a bit between no limit and PLO, right? I think no limit you're looking at 70 to 90 generally, depending on how.
Yeah, I'm not even that familiar with the no limit hold'em. I haven't studied the heads up no limit. I just know that hold'em is a bit less, but
yeah,
I think I couldn't say the magnitude.
I think Ben Sulsky in one video was sort of showing that PLO, it can be, I can't remember this exactly, so don't quote me on it, but something like 80 to 100 is standard, or 75 to 100 is standard in No Limit, and then PLO can be like 120 to 150 or something. So like quite a big difference. What have your what's it been like then playing 6 max PLO, and obviously a bit of live PLO you mentioned to me before we started recording as well? What's it been like having the 4-card game as your main income, and the volatility that comes with that, and how close equities are running? That must really increase your swings, right?
Well, it has been a lot better than tournaments, to be frank. It's been exactly the reason why I went out of tournaments, because I just didn't feel comfortable with that current bankroll in 2017 anymore to continue playing tournaments. I saw that I basically came just after like binking 50k in a Sunday Million, that was a 5th place finish. I started taking shots at some higher limits here and there when I thought the field was good. And I had like 0 cashes at $500 plus buy-in over like 15 tries. So that cost me 30 to 40k very quickly. And then I also at the 100 and 200s did fairly poorly, whether that was in No Limit Hold'em, high-low, Pot Limit Omaha, or any other of the formats. I just didn't really do well at all for like 2017. And then I said, you know what, this is a little bit scary. I don't really see myself with a close to 100% success rate here. And I also had some experience with live poker cash games and what I would expect to win there. I said, you know what, tournament is by far the worst idea for me to proceed going forward. So then I looked more into PLO cash. I had also had some coaching with Jane Anders in 2017, and had access to like some pretty good information for the time back then. So I thought that maybe I would have an advantage in PLO, and it didn't work out as well immediately. But then when I went back into the live poker scene and then play a lot of No Limit cash in live poker and a lot of PLO cash in live poker, and I could just game select in all the EPT stops in Vegas, I just saw so much opportunity to play live poker in both No Limit and PLO, and how well I could build my bankroll like that.
And what would you say to someone who's thinking about checking out the 4-card game, who's like maybe getting a bit jaded with No Limit, and obviously No Limit's getting very tough now? Like, people are, solver work is out there, people are working very, very hard. Like, even at 100 NL 6 max, during the day, there's going to be a lot of regs that have studied extensive game theory in that pool, and it's very hard actually to, as a new player coming up who's not got a long-term poker grounding, to make it up to like mid stakes successfully in No Limit these days. It really takes a full life dedication of making it your career, I think, in my opinion, for most people. Is PLO a bit softer? Like, would you say there's a bit more opportunity there? Is there more of a veil of ignorance over the population's knowledge? And if someone is thinking about switching over, why should they do it, and what should they do initially to help make that transition as smooth as possible?
I can't speak much for the No Limit Hold'em competence of the average player, but what I can say about PLO is that, especially at the lower limits, if you factor in rake-back deals, etc., whether that is through leaderboards competitions, just through high volume play, or comparing like all the different sites and what rake-back they offer, if you do that well, you can find some pretty okay-ish success early on the Microstakes. I would not recommend trying it on stars, even though you can win at those. It's just a very high rake situation and a rake trap, to be honest.
I'll just cover up the logo on this hoodie for a second, just so nobody can see that I've got my PokerStars hoodie on still. You didn't hear it here. I'm kidding. We're not affiliated on the podcast, don't worry. Yeah, it's really, I think it's really important to be objective about where people can make it and where they can't make it. And do you think site selection is like a really neglected aspect of Microstakes people trying to come up the ladder?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's pretty much like I did the Microstakes challenge on my channel 2 years ago, and I did some pretty poor plays rake-wise. For example, something that you could do in PLO when you have like something, a hand like ace, jack, jack, 8, single suited against a whale, that hand pushes equity, right, against the average whale hand. Whereas if you're raking 5% of the pot, on microstakes, this makes like no sense to play 4-bet pots with. Whereas if you have very low rake against a whale, these hands, you can 4-bet them all day long. Just because they push equity and you don't pay enough rake, and then that's totally fine. But I just noticed that with any other hands than ace, even ace king wasn't doing that well. But like any other hand than aces, if I got in a lot of money pre and they were not folding, I was just raking way too much to make up for it. So in the end, the bankroll challenge, I ran massively under EV, but I would have I said I can turn $4 into $1,000 in 30 days of playtime. So I would only count like 1 day of playing like 5 to 10k hands or something. And then I tried to make it in 30 days and I didn't do it. And I think I wasn't drawing dead because the EV would be approximating the $1,000 in the end. But in the end, I ran a lot below EV and that just didn't work. And probably the win rate wasn't also as high as I was hoping for it to be.
Okay.
As I said, also made some pretty poor plays at times due to A, not knowing that it was a poor play, and B, multi-tabling and then sometimes tilting pretty massively just because I couldn't beat Microstakes players on some of the days. It's like, how is this even possible? It was a lot of pain to play the Microstakes challenge, and I pretty much told people that they have to do a lot of the things that I wasn't doing, like play A, less tables, B, really make sure that you're playing in an environment where the rake situation is great for you and it's not working against you. And when you do that, for example, like these days with leaderboards, if you're playing somewhat okay, you should be able to win at the micros.
And you'd recommend that people seek out for Microstakes PLO, like places like, I know runatonce.com does some, Party Poker has some leaderboard stuff, like sort of daily leaderboards, and concentrate their volume on a daily basis to really minimize that rake paid. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the way to go right now in PLO Cash, because it just makes such a large difference. Microstakes rake is often 10 BB per 100, sometimes more. And if you get like 70-80% rake back, that's just a massive win rate that you farm through that. And then you also get like to experience like winning and increasing your bankroll, which later on you can still deposit money from your real job or from elsewhere. You don't have to make all the money from poker to build your bankroll. I think that's a silly idea, and I would not recommend that. I would always take money from elsewhere, especially in 2020. It's not like it was in 2010 where you could just grind all the way up easily. You can still do that, but it's not that. It doesn't make that much sense.
And even then, that may have been a silly idea, just because it was feasible. Just because a line is plus EV doesn't make it the highest EV line, right? So even back then, that strategy may not have been too great, if you'll excuse the poker metaphor. But like, I don't know. I think some students have this weird obsession with like, I want to be self-sufficient from poker. I want to take this $40. I want the dream. I want the Hollywood of turning it into $1,000, and they see the people like you doing the bankroll challenges and things like that on Twitch, and it inspires them to do that. But my advice is the same as yours to students these days. I just say, in business, it would be a very, very bad idea if you had capital to refuse to invest any of your capital and to try to build your business without capital. That's like trying to run a race with a ball and chain tied around your ankle. And when you're a poker player, you're running your own business. Like, I see it as, I'm a businessman in poker regardless of whether I'm making a podcast today or writing a book or marketing a range on my website or just grinding. Like, either way, you're working for yourself and you're trying to build your finances and make something of yourself. So I think people really need to sit down and say, instead of just following, like, I like the software here, or having like a tunnel vision view of what they want to do, they need to think about it from a business perspective. And I think if poker players were a little more shrewd in that sense, you'd probably find less frustrated people bashing their head off a wall at the Microstakes. Rake is not glamorous and it's not fun to talk about, but it may well be the difference between you getting started in poker and not.
Yeah, and one of the problems that I see in the Microstakes is that there's obviously people from countries where $200 to $500 is actually a large amount, and therefore they're willing to battle it out on those micro stakes for these low amounts as well. So you have grinders that actually never intend to move up really, but they are just on these micro stakes and they're actually making a living on micro stakes, right? I think that is not that beneficial for the ecosystem. And I think if you're one of those people, I mean, I am not criticizing you, because if you make your living like that, it's fair. But it is just, yeah, long term, you just have to see that it's going to get tougher, right? And you're going to have to improve sooner or later. And it's just not sustainable on the long run, right? It might be for now, but then later on, it doesn't really do much for you long term.
No, and there's inflation and money becomes less and less valuable. And are you actually building skills that make long-term amounts of gain? I was talking to a student the other day, very serious guy that I teach, extremely high work ethic, very motivated and a very disciplined, intelligent guy. And, you know, we were talking about, what do you want to do today? Like, how do you want to spend your time? You could set a 100 NL that he's currently playing on WSOP.com, which is basically like sitting in a Vegas 100 NL 6-max game. It's honestly one of the most lucrative places to play No Limit right now on the internet. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And he could make a good hourly. Maybe he can earn $25, $30, $40 an hour playing in this game. And for most people who have just come out of college or school, that's a great starting wage. However, what is that amount of dollars per hour going to do for you 5 years? Is that time you're spending grinding making you money next week? Is it making you money 3 years from now? And we came to the conclusion that it is, because he's getting better as he plays, but it's only ever so slightly increasing his future EV. Whereas if he was to spend an hour working in Lucid Trainer with Pio and really drilling a certain node, he might actually be adding value to the future. But because the future is way more than the present, right? Maybe the future is, 1,000 weeks of poker play in his life or something. It's a lot of time. That money is multiplying exponentially. It's just it's snowballing, basically.
Especially if you're young, right? If you're
right.
Yeah,
I think he's about 20, 25, 24, something like that. So I was like, man, your brain is still working on such a level right now that now is the time to do that. So yeah, I think like I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but I think it's relevant because people trying to make it and say, as a PLO player these days, they'll be very tempted to just grind. And I see this all the time. I see a guy like, I've broken even over 600,000 hands. It's like, why the fuck have you played 600,000 hands as a break-even player? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing with your time? So yeah, get coached, play the rake system, game select. Any technical points, those are the practical points. Any technical points with somebody moving over from Hold'em to PLO, what should they look at first and how should they study?
I mean, people trash their time sometimes grinding hundreds of thousands of hands and not really think twice, and that's exactly a great point that you're making there. They just don't see the big picture and how they actually have a choice to do better with a different strategy and to study more and develop their game more. But like, what am I going to say? I mean, something that I did this year is that I played a lot of these leaderboards as well, and I didn't get like that much better during the play, but at least I studied some in between. But I certainly have sacrificed some short-term, or I have made some short-term choices as well this year just to increase my bankroll. But I thought it was somewhat sound because also of the opportunities that are coming back when the pandemic is over. I think that having a better bankroll when the pandemic is over is pretty important to my success in the future. So there's always like, okay, should I study now or should I make some money? But I wouldn't have settled for breaking even for a couple of 100,000 hands.
Yeah, definitely. And what about in terms of what should I study technically? Like if I'm working through from the GTO of Hold'em through to the GTO of Omaha, and I want to have a GTO based game in PLO, how do I go about that? Like, should I use things like Vision or Munker, or should I like study preflop first, or what concepts really sort of jump out at you?
Visions does a little bit of both, right? It has a preflop, a lot of preflop in there, and it also has postflop solves where you can just test yourself and how well you know. the things, and you can explore how the equilibrium works in a lot of different areas of the game tree. So when you also add on Monker, you can do a couple of river calculations on top of that, and then you pretty much can explore most of the, or actually everything of the 100 BB. If you want to do 200 BB and above, then you need to be a bit more advanced with Monker Solver and have access to some of these sims that have been run for like a month or longer. But you can do most of the things that are relevant to PLO with Vision. So that's pretty much, I think, the way to go to understand what's really going on in the game. And it will take a long time. It's not gonna work out for just like 100 or 200 hours. You have to really put in the time to understand how the game is gonna work.
Yeah. I've got something else I want to lead on to in a second on that note, but what you just said there blew my mind. You're telling, if I understood you correctly, there are solvers running for a month straight to solve a deep PLO preflop spot. I presume that's for.
And that's for the preflop solution. Like for example, one company has done like a 250 BB, right? Where I think that is just 5 max because it takes so much processing power to run a simulation that deep in PLO. With like abstractions for post flop that give you like just like one sizing, like a pot sizing or so. I'm not even sure what sizings they have used, but that is, again, in PLO you have 100 BB, you have 50 BB, 30. You can study like any BB range, right? How deep you are in the game, and there's actually quite a few surprising things that change from each stack depth. In tournaments, you have all the stack depths from 10 to 50 BB, and in cash games sometimes you have all these short stackers, and you have to know how to defend versus short stackers, even if you're not playing as a short stacker yourself. So that is even more relevant. I am not sure how many short stackers are in Hold'em, but I would assume the PLO versus short stacking play is pretty relevant, and whereas in Hold'em it's not as relevant. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Now, how many short stackers are there in Hold'em these days?
Not that many, not as many as there were, and they typically have something like 60 big blinds a lot of the time, so they're not. It's not like you're having to learn 25 BB poker or anything like that. So that makes it even more sort of the stuff you have to really study then in PLO is really abundant. You have to be a jack of more trades really to sort of increase your win rate. You can't just tunnel in on 100 big blinds. Like I recommend that students rat hole when they win 40 bigs, because the game tree in Hold'em changes dramatically if you add 40 big blinds to the starting stack. You got to 140, suddenly hands that are big bets have to be small bets or checks, and just your thresholds for how much equity you need to blow up the pot is going to change, and all these kinds of things. So so PLO in one sense then is quite an undertaking. It's not something that you should embark on lightly, because there is just so much to study and the theory is so dense, right? So it's quite a lot.
It's also a challenge to select what you're going to study. You can punt a lot of time, and I have certainly done that, into areas of the game tree that are not that high frequency and not that high relevance. It's about high relevance is how often the spot comes up and how big the pot is going to be on average when that spot comes up. Maybe there are some rare spots, but when they happen, they are for so many big blinds that you don't want to fully punt that spot. And then there's obviously high frequency spots that are for small pots, but they come up like every 10 hands or every 50 hands, and you want to study them because they're just so high frequency, but they're not large pots. So you have to decide on all these factors, what are you going to study? What's the best play or route for you to go?
Probably don't spend 4 days looking at check, over bet, all in a 4-bet pot or something like that, right? Let's avoid these scraggly leaves on the end of branches. Let's look at the trunks, the main things.
The ones that come up often, and simplify your strategy also up to some degree. You don't have to always have a perfect strat. You can simplify things.
That's one of my challenges as a coach, actually, simplification, because I always have to keep reminding myself that just because I've spent years working on having a block bet and an over bet and a big bet in some spot on the river, the student might not want to do that. That might not be in the best interest for the student. So it's like, how do we take one bet size and sort of teach that first, or maybe two? Not in all spots in Hold'em can you get away with one bet size, and some you can, and others you need two. But the third bet size is something that I always really want to bring into my lessons because I love having a complex strategy that I can study and work on. But at the same time, it's probably not in the interest of everybody. Just real quick then, is PLO the kind of game that you can simplify a lot? Like, do you feel like there's a big difference between bet sizes on different nodes? Like, what would you say to me as a student if I just said, hey, Andreas, can you teach me how to just only use 75% pot on all nodes of all streets? Would you say that that's a step too far?
The fact that PLO is a pot limited game and you cannot overbet will at least make things in single race pots and actually a fair bit easier. For example, if you're in position and you're building a pot in a single race pot, you're looking to bet a large amount on the flop on a lot of unpaired non-straight boards, because those boards you will have a value portion that can go for 3 streets and larger bet later on. And if you only had used a small size, you could then no longer bet big or get as much money into just being the aggressor. You need like your opponent to raise you at some point to get all the money in.
Whereas in Hold'em, you could always block everything on the flop as a simplification and then follow up with 2 overbets to get them all in by the turn of the river. Makes sense.
And that changes the game to single race pot quite a bit. And in 3-bet pots, you have a lot of dynamic play because of all the draws present. You try to you always have like those equity buckets that are used for certain sizings. For example, like you have a small and a big size when you're 3-betting out of position for the most part on some boards, and then that hand you try to end as quickly as possible with a large chunk of your range by the turn and not really play a river out of position against a range that can polarize with nuts and air hands, and you doing all the guesswork. You can just push your equity, where your whole pre-flop game plan goes into building a range that will push that equity, having a lot of aces and then drawing hands that make up the other portion of your range.
Because denial is just so important when equities run that close together, right? Like in Hold'em, I might be making a mistake as a beginner by betting maybe what I'd call a tier 2 hand, like a 72% equity hand, and I'm betting too large with it on the turn, and like the fold equity I get is fairly useless maybe, but in PLO it might be correct for me to merge a bit more heavily there just in order to clean up a lot more equity when I do reap that fold. I'm reaping much more of a benefit to my EV, right, in that case. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about how to learn the game then. I feel like today there's a lot of content out there for No Limit, and there's PLO is actually quite nice and streamlined in a sense, because the PLO market isn't so much drowning in all this nonsense. It's not as mainstream. It doesn't have like I would see it as if music was an analogy. The pop culture with the music video with the dancing girls would be like a lot of the Hold'em courses that are out there at the moment. It's so mainstream and it's just aimed at this generic person that has this dream of making it in poker. Whereas PLO, you've got Galfond and Run It Once and Vision and all the really scientific, methodical stuff that they've done for the market. I learned a bit of PLO last year, and when I did, or the start of this year, and when I did, I just trained Vision for like a couple of weeks, and by the end of that 2-week period, I was way better. I play a bit of 8 game, and when the PLO rotation came round, I felt like, this is maybe my 3rd best game now or something, rather than like my worst game. So that was awesome, and I loved how streamlined that was, and that's great. But in Hold'em, like, what do you think about the sheer volume of courses that's out here? Like, here's my graph, it's going straight up. Buy my course. Most poker players fail to realize this fundamental truth. Where do you feel we're going as a community if we keep buying these courses?
I mean, I even thought about, like, I do a couple of YouTube videos a year, and I even thought about like going more into that kind of content, because I think that there's a lot of bullshit salesmanship going on, especially in No Limit Hold'em courses, and how they're sold on the internet, and people just buy into that magic pill that they can buy and somehow get good at poker, and they're just punting off thousands of dollars, and they're just never going to get anything out of it. Sure, like there's a certain audience that will get value from these courses. That's undeniably a fact, and of course the quality of the courses is all over the place. But then these players, they have made a lot of money playing poker already, and every adjustment that they can hear from a guy like Alex Miller, for example, that will help their games out, right? And they can then make those tweaks. But then a lot of recreational players, when they buy those courses, they're not even going through the course because some might be way too tough for them. Some might be not useful at all for them to study at that point. Some of it just has a very unappealing way of presenting things as well. And yeah, what I'm really getting at is the whole marketing being extreme out there. It's just basically focusing on making it more about what it feels like, crushing the game, etc., and always using those terminologies and always posting a lot of survivorship bias and how students have been doing buying these courses. And it's not really about helping people to become better at the game, but it's like 99% the sales that are coming out from the courses. And I can tell it from like a perspective of like I'm a PLO player, and let's say I'm curious about No Limit Hold'em. What I would want to see is like someone going out there and say, look, yes, this product is expensive, but I've done everything. Like if I charge $1,000 or even more, then I have at least a reasonable amount of sim libraries in my course that you can study. And I'm not even going to explain to you how these spots work. I'm not just going to, go through some plain explain and just run through some generic hands and then not showing you the background or talking at least about how the spot works. I'm not saying that all of them don't do that, but I think there's just not a really great product out there, at least for cash, where you have all the sim libraries. Where I enjoy a lot more something like, for example, DTO poker, where you have like a study tool that you can use and then basically go through the reasoning, okay, why you use certain bet sizes and follow up on that. And the more access you have to the raw material and can basically dive into it yourself, I think the better learning success you will have. And I think that's something that's done in PLO. You can really go deep into, okay, why certain things happen. Whereas in PLO, in No Limit, I feel like you almost still have to do all the sims yourself, even though you paid so much money for like somebody making a course for you. And I think that shouldn't. I think things should be expensive in poker, no doubt about it. Where basically I coach people as well, and you're offering people some knowledge to make a lot of money, right? And that can never be cheap. Not against the pricing. I'm just about the value that these things provide. I think is so much lower than for the average person again than they could if they really tried hard.
Yep. But I think poker coaching and tuition and courses right now are actually a complete consumerist market at the moment. I don't think there's a big percentage of poker tuition that's purchased that actually increases people's EV. I think a lot of money is sunk into this from the community, and I'll get your views on this in a second, but I feel that people like, Daniel Negreanu's How to Master Poker course that's being advertised everywhere, where he's talking about eating sandwiches and being loosey-goosey. Like this sort of thing is clearly like borderline just nonsense to most people who are really serious about the game, and most of the stuff within that is unlikely to be worth the cost. But people don't know that, right? And people are looking for magic beans. They're looking for dreams. They want to climb this ladder to success. And I think it's really dangerous for the community actually when there are people making trash content. And I haven't watched Daniel Negreanu's course, so don't think I'm just like hating on him, although I generally do that, but what I'm trying to say here is that like if so much of the beginner's money is actually thrown into terrible tuition that's not going to help them, that doesn't show them what GTO is about, I think that's really what bothers me, that there's so much teaching that almost tells people they can make it without studying theory. GTO is nonsense, just learn these 8 simple truths. Nonsense. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to understand the game. But what does that do to the quality of our 25NL games if fish are spending their money on these courses instead of sitting at the tables? What does it do when we magnetize these players who have no chance of ever making it, who will be recreationals for life, and sadly that's a lot of people, I'm sure you've seen that from people that apply to your own coaching sometimes. You just have to end up saying, look, you're never going to really get to these goals that you're setting. But what does that do to our community? What does that do to our ecosystem if we have all these people selling magic beans to recreational players?
Yeah.
It dries up the games, and it causes people, it overcrowds the market as well, right? It's causing people to spend money on bad tuition.
I think that's just a natural way of how the industry is going. And I think also an additional question that what would it do if we actually had people teaching all these things in an optimal manner, right? Like giving you literally everything that you need to understand the game and really walking you through. Then maybe it even would be worse in terms of the ecosystem, right? Maybe then these guys would actually make a lot more money, or make the large chunk if they actually advertise it also properly. But then maybe people would get even better at a large pace, which debatably isn't happening everywhere. For example, like in live poker, I think that's obviously not happening because the games are still very, very soft, or at least they were pre-pandemic. I don't expect a lot to have happened.
I just feel sorry for poker players right now. I feel like they're a real learner these days. It's like a moth like flying around, and there's all these light bulbs lighting up, and it's kind of like coincidence which light bulb the moth flies towards. And if you happen to get snared by a fairly bad method of teaching or learning poker early on, not only can it hold you back and stagnate you, but it can teach you bad habits that will poison your game many years from now. So I think you have to be, if you're like a new player and you're thinking about what to learn and what to not learn, be super careful and vet coaches before you just hire them or prescribe to their methodology.
Yeah, make sure to bet on the right people and who to learn from. And like if you cannot learn, I always tell also the people that are interested in like getting coaching from me, like if you haven't learned anything from my free content or from my paid content for like essential videos and run ones, or anywhere about anything that I put out there, then you probably shouldn't like work with me, right? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I try to make things more simple, of course, on YouTube because it's for a general audience, and I try to bog it down a little bit. But at the same time, I still want to provide some value, even to people who are trying to make it, and so that I give them some perspective on what needs to be done to basically get success in the game. And if you can't find in your source of who you're trying to trust and to getting good, then you should probably not proceed, whether that's with a course nor coaching, right? It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, it's something you have to get right these days at a fairly early point, I would say. Not to say that if you get that wrong and you digest a lot of bad information that there's no coming back from that, but coming back from learning lots of bad ideas is much harder. I say this on my pod all the time, that someone that's been around poker for 6 years as a losing player is much harder to fix than someone who's just picked up the game 6 months ago, for example. So I think you do have to be very careful, like you say.
There's this one thing where, when, for example, let's say you're playing, whether it's Hold'em or PLO, and then you're winning, and you're doing it with like a really silly strategy that somehow in this meta, in this environment still works, but at some point it stops working. Now it's totally useless, right?
Yeah.
It's like not worth a single dollar anymore. Like it was worth something for a certain amount of time, and you can just try to milk that ability to make money in that game for so long, and then afterwards, because you've never learned any sound strategy whatsoever, your entire poker learning was worthless, because you used like this so great exploitative strategy that you don't even know why it's exploitative to begin with and why it's working. Maybe you just happen to see that it's winning, and that's fine. Especially in live poker, it's been exactly how I started. So that could be also perceived as being hypocritical. Hey, Andreas, the first winnings you have from poker, they were all exactly like that. You sat down at the table. But today it's different. Back in 2013, when I started becoming a winning player, we didn't there was Pio, but like people were really not doing, not a lot of people were working with it. And you could just sit down and try to win with your own strategies. And I think that it's only worth something if you're somebody like Phil Galfond, because clearly he was at an elite level of forging these strategies, right? Of thinking, and even if you listen to Doug Polk's Heads Up course, for example, what I really think was great in that course is that he explained to you his methodology of going into all these different nodes. I don't know if you've seen his videos in that course,
No.
but I think it's really great because he dissected it in all these different lines of going bet, check, back, and so on and so forth. And that was like fairly early. And then going into game tree analysis, I can totally get behind that because that's somehow, that's a methodology, right? That there's some validity to that approach, and especially pre-solver. And that's going to be, even today, that would still be winning in a lot of environments if you had it down to that level, right?
Yep.
However, if you just did like some pen and paper math and you didn't do it on an elite level, like a guy like Galfond or Polk, probably two of the most famous poker teachers out there, or have taught poker in the past, right? Doug, not really last 3 years because he hired other people for his company. But yeah, if you get it to that level, it's all fine. But everything that's like not anywhere close to that, it's at some point becoming kind of worthless, and not really some tangent I would go into or recommend people trying to do.
Yep. So the poker learner who's listening to this should certainly take a step back, just make sure that everything they're doing is grounded in theory. And the magic word in my mind is EV. If you don't understand the source of EV, if you're listening to this and you're thinking you do things for one reason alone, like you have mono reasons for things, and people do this in politics and in life all the time, like, I'm going to vote Conservative because the Labour Party has this one policy about blah blah blah, and people have mono reasons for things, and that usually generates a biased and non-full view of the picture. And it happens in poker too, where people are like, I'm going to bet for protection, or I'm going to check to induce a bluff here, and they don't seem to like put it into the context of what the hand wants to do in theory and how often and why. And then do you have a reason to deviate? Like, I'm so fed up of teaching people who have learned from someone exploitative and are basically like, but don't we just bet to induce? And it's just like, what are you talking? Like, I can't even respond to that. Yeah. It's just like it's so like far off the mark that it's almost better to just dismantle everything to set fire to your whole game and then start again. So do be careful.
There's just so few people that can actually pull it off. That's the thing. And these people are usually so biased. There's just such a huge survivorship bias. They just made it, and they assume that they can, other people can pull that off as well, which is just not true. They've just been incredibly gifted and talented, and they made it for that reason, and not because, and also because they were in the right times. Maybe if they did it 10 years later, it wouldn't have been the same success, or at least not in that magnitude.
Oh, definitely
right? Or definitely not.
I mean, I think if you take like some of the really exploitative players from like 5 years ago and you throw them in today's game and you put them in like 200 Zoom online or like on Stars or something, I think they get wiped out very, very quickly, the majority of them, regardless of how good their intuition is, because all it takes for someone to demolish you when you're that kind of player is a relatively sound strategy without big leaks in it, and then you're making so many fundamental errors that you've beaten yourself before you get the chance to exploit anything. Anyway,
the only one thing I wanted to say to this, like that is actually though fun, that this whole discussion that Phil still proved people that he can still do it. That I think is just like exceptional.
I think that's great.
And
but we should also point out that Phil is not theoretically blind. He's Phil. He's got the mindset of an absolute, I don't know, god of Cam, but not just that, and it's not just his focus, not just his temperament and his mindset, not just his positivity, but also the fact that yes, he has such a sixth sense for poker, and he can play that way, but a lot of his strategies he's harmonized with theory. He's not rejected game theory in favor of his old approach. He's maybe trusted his intuitions a bit more again in the second half of that match. We'll end this podcast as we begun, I guess. But he's not rejected GTO. He's not said, this newfangled GTO stuff, I don't need it, I can survive without it. He's said, let me study this. And I bet he's become a stronger player for figuring out how to take that in, but also how to make that gel with his game, right? Because when you learn a bunch of theory, it knocks you about a bit. It probably makes your game slightly worse before it makes it better again. And you have to learn how to integrate all of that theory. And I think Phil does that. I think he's super sound theoretically. He's not the guy in the world that knows the most about solver outputs, although he does know a fair bit now. But it's his combination of that with his talent that makes for such a strong player. And I think that for many people,
That's
It's
just
both, but it's theory first.
yeah, because that's just something that works and should work for most people, and whereas Phil is an exception. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been a cool discussion. One final point. We mentioned sim libraries earlier. How important is it for someone learning PLO to build up some kind of database of spots that they can like go back to all the time? Like, would you say that is fundamental in this day and age to build these up on your own machine independently rather than relying on external content?
I think it's more important to build up concepts than, I mean, you have those sim libraries somewhere, at least you had the opportunity to look at them at some point, but the concepts derived from those are really meaningful. But yeah, I just think that my criticism towards the Hold'em courses is that they are actually not showing you, they just can't show you enough of the concepts without showing you actually the sim libraries. And I think a lot of them just don't do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's why I'm saying to students these days, have a sim library, build it up. This is how you use Pio Pro. When you're asleep, your computer's generating this for you. You're making money while you're sleeping, optimize your time. I think these days it's essential. But yeah, Andreas, it's been really awesome having you on the show, and I've really enjoyed your insight as not just a poker player, but as a coach and as a real journeyman of the game. You've been everywhere. You've seen a lot of different things recently. Your take on the Galfond challenge, it's been really fun. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on in the future, and we'll chat more about the poker landscape.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right, guys, you know where to go if you want more from me. It's carrotcorner.com. And we are currently building our own library of solved ranges for preflop on carrotcorner.com, available at a very accessible price. And we'll see you for the next podcast in the very near future. Thank you for watching, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If it's March, ignore that, but I'm recording this at Christmas time. See you guys. Bye for now.